Boa noite a todos, boa noite a todas, sejam muito bem-vindos. Pedro, Jaco, Douglas, Leandro, boa noite. A gente está começando aqui a live de lançamento do segundo volume da Revista Oriente Cristão. Estou muito feliz de estar aqui com vocês e estar aqui com o professor Stanislau Paulau para a gente divulgar um dos artigos que vão ser publicados hoje na revista. Primeiro de tudo, eu queria lembrar que essa vai ser uma transmissão bilíngue aqui no YouTube. Apenas essa primeira parte aqui eu vou fazer em inglês e em português para garantir que o professor, quanto outra audiência em língua inglesa, possa entender. Mas, dependente do seu conhecimento de línguas, você pode ativar o Closed Captions aqui embaixo no YouTube e selecionar a tradução simultânea para as legendas. Mais instruções eu deixei aqui no card embaixo, aqui da tela. First of all, I like to remind you that this will be a bilingual broadcast here on YouTube. Regardless of your language skills, you can turn on closed captions here on YouTube and select simultaneous translation for the subtitles. Further instructions you can find here on the screen card. Assim como o próprio GEOC, essa revista nasce com o objetivo de ampliar no Brasil o campo de estudo sobre cristianismos orientais, reunindo pesquisadores de diferentes instituições e promovendo diálogo com a produção internacional. Este número é particularmente especial para nós porque inclui, entre outros trabalhos de pesquisadores brasileiros, a tradução para o português de um artigo do professor Stanislau Paulau, intitulado Um monge ortodoxo etíope no berço da Reforma, Abba Mika'el, Martinho Lutero e a unidade da Igreja. A tradução desse texto foi realizada pelo editor-chefe da revista, Alfredo Cruz, e revisada por mim, e foi possível graças ao apoio da comunidade do GEOC, que contribuiu financeiramente para viabilizar o pagamento dos direitos autorais. Like GEOC itself, the journal was established with the aim of broadening the field of studies on Eastern Christianity in Brazil, bringing together research from different institutions and fostering dialogue with the international academic community. This issue is particularly special to us because it includes, amongst other works by Brazilian researchers, the Portuguese translation of an article by Professor Stanislau Paulau entitled An Ethiopian Orthodox Monk at the Cradle of the Reformation, Abba Mika'el, Martin Luther, and the Unity of the Church. The translation of this text was carried out by the journal's editor-in-chief, Professor Alfredo Cruz, and revised by me. It was made possible thanks to the support of the GEOC community, which helped to cover the copyright fees. Eu agradeço aqui e eu vou fazer esse pequeno momento de agradecimento aos doadores da vaquinha, né? I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to the donors of the crowdfunding campaign, Sérgio Pazanaro, Cristiane, Miriam, Alfredo, Leonardo, Tiago, Mônica, Larissa, Mário, Carlos, Luiz Lobianco, Murilo, Heitor, Cláudio, Vinícius, ao CNPq, Conselho Nacional de Pesquisa, e a todos e todas que não contribuíram de forma financeira, mas ajudaram compartilhando a mensagem. Isso foi realmente importante. Muito mesmo. Se vocês puderem, divulguem sempre trabalhos de colegas e conhecidos. Também faço meus agradecimentos ao Brian, diretor de copyright da Abril, que ajudou em todo esse processo. And to everyone who didn't contribute financially, but helped by sharing the message. Thanks. That was really important. I would like to thank you, Brian, by Brill's copyright director, who helped with the whole process. Durante a transmissão, vocês podem enviar perguntas aqui no chat do YouTube, que nós estaremos atentos para apresentar ao final da fala do professor Paulau. Throughout the broadcast, you can send questions via YouTube chat, while we will keep an eye on them so we can put them to Professor Paulau at the end of his talk. Muito obrigado a todo mundo. A revista é um periódico acadêmico vinculado ao YouTube, ao GEOC, Grupo de Estudos de História do Oriente Cristão, fundado em 2019. O grupo reúne estudantes e pesquisadores interessados no estudo histórico, cultural e religioso das tradições cristãs orientais. A criação dessa revista surgiu da percepção de que esse campo de estudos ainda é relativamente pouco desenvolvido no Brasil. Embora exista uma produção internacional muito relevante sobre o tema, os cristianismos orientais ainda aparecem de forma limitada na historiografia brasileira. Nesse sentido, a Oriente Cristão busca criar um espaço acadêmico dedicado a esse campo de estudos e estimular novas pesquisas para serem publicadas em língua portuguesa. A revista tem perfil interdisciplinar e recebe contribuições das áreas como História, Ciência da Religião, Teologia, Linguística, Filologia e Estudos Culturais. Nosso objetivo é promover o diálogo entre diferentes abordagens e ampliar a compreensão das tradições cristãs no Oriente em suas múltiplas dimensões históricas e culturais. Oriente Cristão Journal is an academic journal connected to GEOC, the study group on history of Eastern Christianity, which was founded in 2019. The group brings together researchers, students, scholars interested in the history of Eastern Christianity, cultural and religious studies. The journal was created from the recognition that this field is still relatively undeveloped in Brazil. Although there is a rich international scholarship on Eastern Christianity, these traditions are not still widely represented in Brazilian historiography. In this sense, the journal seeks to create an academic space dedicated to this field and to encourage further research. The journal has an interdisciplinary profile and welcomes contributions from the fields such as history, religious studies, theology, linguistics, philology, and cultural studies. Our goal is to promote dialogue between different academic approaches and to broaden the understanding of Eastern Christian traditions in their various historical and cultural contexts. O segundo volume reúne trabalhos de pesquisadores vinculados ao GEOC e de colaboradores de diferentes instituições. Os artigos que a gente vai publicar hoje abordam uma grande diversidade de temas, incluindo estudos sobre textos gnósticos cristãos, a preservação do livro de Enoque na tradição etíope, a circulação da tradição enoquiana no cristianismo etíope, debates sobre espiritualidade monástica, a história dos cristãos de São Tomé na Índia, bem como estudos sobre a comunidade do Oriente Cristão no mundo moderno e contemporâneo. Além dos artigos, o volume também inclui traduções acadêmicas de fontes e textos importantes para o campo, como uma homilia relacionada a São Frumencio de Axum, comentários sobre as cartas de Agostinho de Hipona e uma tradução do prólogo da Alexíada, de Ana Comnena. Essas traduções fazem parte de um esforço da revista para ampliar o acesso em língua portuguesa a textos relevantes para a pesquisa histórica. Esperamos que esse projeto contribua para fortalecer os estudos sobre o Oriente Cristão no Brasil e para ampliar o diálogo entre pesquisadores brasileiros e a produção acadêmica internacional. Eu faço um último agradecimento a todos que tornaram esse volume possível e a todos que estão aqui acompanhando este lançamento. The second volume brings together contributions from members of GEOC and partner research from different institutions. The articles cover a wide range of topics, including the studies on Christian Gnostic texts, the preservation of the Book of Enoch in Ethiopian Christian tradition, echoes of the Enoch literature in the Ethiopian Christianity, monastic spirituality, the history of St. Thomas Christians in India, and studies related to Eastern Christian communities in the modern and contemporary world. In addition to research articles, the volume also includes translations of important historical and literary sources, such as an homily that related to Saint Frumencius of Axum, comments on the letters of Augustine, and a translation of the prologue of the Alexíada by Ana Comnena. These translations aim to expand access to important primary sources for Portuguese-speaking scholars. We hope that this project contributes to strengthening the study of Eastern Christianity in Brazil and to fostering dialogue between Brazil scholars and the broader international academic community. Thank you all for joining us today for supporting this initiative. Dando continuidade, então, ao evento, para não tomar mais tempo de vocês, eu tenho um prazer enorme e a enorme satisfação de receber o professor Stanislau Paulau. Ele é professor em História Global do Cristianismo e Estudos do Cristianismo Ortodoxo na Martinho Lutero Universität Halle-Wittenberg, doutor em Teologia pela George August Universität Göttingen, especializou-se nas relações transconfessionais entre a ortodoxia etíope e o protestantismo europeu, possui formação em teologia ortodoxa, estudos interculturais e estudos interreligiosos, com passagens pelas universidades em Minsk, Berlim, Göttingen, Genebra e Addis Abeba. Tem se destacado por pesquisas sobre história do cristianismo global e recebeu diversos prêmios acadêmicos, incluindo o Manfred Lothenschläger Award for Theological Promise. O trabalho que apresentaremos hoje examina um episódio bastante singular da história da Reforma e que praticamente me encantou. O encontro entre Martinho Lutero e o monge etíope Abba Mika'el, um momento em que abre novas perspectivas para a gente pensar essas relações entre a Reforma e os cristianismos orientais. Continuing with this event, we now have the great pleasure of welcoming Professor Stanislau Paulau. He's a professor of global history of Christianity in Orthodox Christian Studies at Martin Luther Universität Halle-Wittenberg. He holds a PhD in theology from George August University Göttingen, having specialized in interdenominational relations between Ethiopian Orthodox and European Protestantism. He has a background in Orthodox theology, intercultural studies, and inter-religious studies, having studied at universities in Minsk, Berlin, Göttingen, Geneva, and Addis Ababa. He has distinguished himself through his research into the history of global Christianity and has received several academic awards, including the Manfred Lothenschläger Award for Theological Promise. The article he will present today examines a rather unique episode in the history of Reformation, the meeting between Martin Luther and the Ethiopian monk Abba Mika'el, a moment that opens up a new perspective for considering the relation between European Reformation and Eastern Christianity. Professor Paulau, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and taking part of this launch. And please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, dear Murilo, for this introduction. It is indeed a great pleasure for me and honor to be part of this event of launching the second issue of the journal. And I would like also to extend my gratitude to the editorial board who made it possible that my work is now also available in Portuguese language, which is incredible. So thank you very much. And I'm really glad also to share some thoughts on the work I have done. And what I'm going to share with you is not the article itself, because I thought you can read it now, either in English or in Portuguese, but rather it is an introduction to the larger context, which I thought might be interesting to launch a greater discussion around the issues of how we can place the Christian Orient or Christian East, if you wish, in the context of global history. So that's basically the core question and the starting point of my talk. And since it's quite late now in Germany, it's 10 p.m., I also thought I'm not going to give a proper lecture, but rather in a style of conversation, I would like to introduce to some ideas I would like to share with you. And then we can, of course, also come into a proper conversation with question and answer. And now I would like also to share the presentation. Yes, wonderful. So the title, you can see, it's also part of the title of the paper you can read now in the second issue of the Journal on Christian Orient. And already here you can see the certain ideas which are central. We have two entities, Ethiopian Orthodoxy and Reformation, two entities which usually are not being put together. And it is actually what I would like to start as a provocation. How do we actually place certain ideas on a historical map? What are our categorization? How histories are being written and narrated? And actually it is usually being done in a context of nation states. So we have histories of Brazil, history of Germany, or it's being done in history of confessional families or confessional entities or churches. Church histories are being narrated from the perspective of certain confessions, churches, communities. And therefore, often we neglect that there are indeed sometimes larger interconnectedness in the history and also in the history of Christianity. And it brings me actually to the debates we had in recent decades on the question of how we indeed can overcome Eurocentric narrative in writing history. How can we decenter those Eurocentric stories and narration? And indeed, those questions are also important for the way of how we narrate history of Christianity. How can we overcome those narratives which are still centering around Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire, or later on Catholic Church or Orthodox Church, which are still, very much fixed entities. So, and I think there are two ways of dealing with this challenge. One important avenue of thought is to try out new areas of investigation. And I think that actually this journal on Christian Orient and the research network is doing exactly this wonderful work, highlighting the importance of various Christianities which developed beyond or on the margins of the Roman Empire. So it's important to center those narratives. We have to study languages and cultures and theologies of these churches, of these Christianities. At the same time, I think that there is also a second possibility of how we can decenter Eurocentric narratives. And we can do it by looking into these grand narratives, into the stories, and try to find out how these grand narratives are being narrated. And maybe if you look precisely, we can see that even within these narratives, there are some lacunas, some free spaces, and some part of the stories which are probably can be narrated in a different way. And I tried to do it with the history of the Reformation, which is often been seen as one of the major events in the history of Christianity. And sometimes some historians also argue that the Reformation was not only a key moment in the history of Christianity, but also in the history of human civilization. So we have some historians who claim that the Reformation can be seen as a starting point, as a birth moment of modernity. So if you look at the way how Reformation is being narrated and try to decenter it, then we come to a point where we actually have to also deal with the Christian Orient. And then what I would like to do in this short talk. So my question is basically, what does the Reformation have to do with the Christian Orient? Or you can phrase this question in a different way, of course. We can rephrase it. You can ask, what does the Christian Orient have to do with the Reformation? And first of all, I would like to give you a very short overview of main conceptual frameworks of how the history of Reformation is being now depicted and narrated. And then I would like to propose a shift of perspective of how we can look onto Reformation history from a different angle. And I would like to argue that actually, in order to understand Reformation in a maybe more inclusive and from my perspective also a proper way, we need to add also a larger context and what we can call also world Christianity at that time. And at that time, it's of course also varieties of Christianities, which we might call Eastern or Oriental at that time. And then I would like maybe to zoom in into one particular case, one case study on encounter between Martin Luther and an Ethiopian Orthodox monk, Abba Mika'el. So let's start. Reformation and the wider world, conceptual frameworks. In the 20th century, we had a huge change of narrative of how Reformation is being narrated. Whereas until 20th century, the Reformation was being narrated mainly in context of European history or history of the German nation. We have a change in this narration, which was brought about by German historian Gerhard Ritter, who tried to connect the world and the Reformation. And he started to speak about the Weltwirkung, or world impact of the Reformation, and he in fact coined this term, Weltwirkung der Reformation, or world impact of the Reformation. Here you can see his book titled in this way, and then he was also an editor of an important journal, which is still quite influential one, Archiv für Reformationsgeschichte, Archive for Reformation History, and since he was editor in the 1930s, he also changed the subtitle of the journal, including also this phrase, Weltwirkung, or if you wish, world impact, or as it is being translated now, also significance in world affairs. So the Reformation is being placed in the context of world history. At the same time, the Reformation is being seen as the, if you wish, the starting or the middle point, a point which actually impacts the world. If you wish, the Reformation is an event which has huge significance, and its consequences are of importance for the world. That's how Gerhard Ritter tried to show it. And this concept had a wonderful career. You can see also several books which also have the same idea in the title, from 1967, from 2017, from different, as you can see, periods where Reformation jubilees were celebrated. And nowadays still, it's quite an important idea, which still has this very much this idea in mind. Reformation is something which impacts the world, which can be understood as a geographical world, but also impacting, different areas of human life, politics, culture, law, and so on. So that's the way the Reformation and the world were put together and still are being put together by many scholars. So, and now I'd like to come to the second conceptual framework, a bit different one, which has developed in last 2 decades. It's an attempt to use the ideas of global history in trying to understand how actually the Protestant Reformation can be placed in the context of global history, and how actually early Protestant empires, as Danish Empire, for example, or British Empire, also brought about in new interconnectedness, in new context. And in this context, Reformation is also plays an important role. However, Reformation is rather a reminiscence of these events of 16th century. And what the authors within this context are trying to do, they're looking mostly on the events of later periods of 18th century, quite prominently, for example, and try to see how on a global map the expanding Protestant empires shaping the world. So the Reformation is still there, if you wish, being seen as the initial point which has impact on other contexts. So I would like to propose a shift of perspective here and suggest that we should not only ask how did the Reformation impacted the world, but rather also how did the world impacted the Reformation. So it should not be, only one way avenue, but also vice versa developments have to be considered. And when I say the world, I also mean also Christian world. And I would like to suggest that also Oriental Christianity from the very beginning plays an important role, and even perhaps it can be used as an interpretive horizon for some debate which took place in the early 16th century in Europe. And here you can see first page of a book which is called Acta Augustana, written by Martin Luther already 1518 in the aftermath of the so-called Diet of Augsburg, where he was interrogated by papal legate and Cardinal Cajetan. And in this text, he actually tried to defend his position on all the controversies connected to indulgence, repentance, grace, and papal authority. And in this very early text, you can already see that he refers quite a lot, what I also quoted here, to Christians of the entire Orient and Africa, showing that there is a Christianity beyond papal authority, and this Christianity also is an important player. And this Christianity, from his view, is also part of what he sees as legitimate expression of Christian faith. And he uses this already in his early writings to legitimate his own views. So Christianity beyond Europe, what we might call Oriental Christianity, plays from the very beginning an important role also for theological argumentation within the debate which were initiated by Luther and Wittenberg Reformation. And it's not only, just one small piece of argument, but it became actually a larger narrative which we can find in Luther's writing from quite early period of time. So here I would like also to highlight another important event in the early Reformation, the so-called Leipzig debate of 1519, and show how also in this context Eastern and Oriental Christianities play a major role in his attempts to produce confessional difference and similarity. So just to give you an impression, a short word of Luther and how he uses Eastern Christians. So he says here, one cannot claim that all other Christians in the whole world are heretics and apostates, even though they adhere to the same baptism, sacraments, gospel, and all articles of faith as we do, except that they do not have their priest and bishop confirmed by Rome, such as Muscovites, White Russians, Greek, Bohemians, and many other great countries in the world. For they all believe as we do, baptize as we do, preach as we do, and live as we do. So as you can see here, the main controversy in this particular context was on the question of authority of the Bishop of Rome, and he brings again the Christians of East and Orient into play and highlights that from his perspectives, those are not heretics or apostates, and tries actually to create a feeling of, togetherness, of communality. And that's an important strategy which Luther used in his writing, and which will also play a larger role in his later arguments, as you will see. So you can see as there's a dynamic, whereas there is a huge controversy within Roman Christian context, as you wish. There is huge clashes between Rome and Luther, but at the same time, there's also a huge clash between Luther and different streams of the Reformation itself. So, and in this polarization, he actually tries very much to highlight his unity and his togetherness with Christians living beyond Europe, and where their Orient and Christian East plays a huge role. And I would like to claim that in order to understand this dynamics of the Reformation in the 16th century, we actually have to look into what I call global epistemic entanglements. And there are three main dimensions I would like to highlight. First of all, we have to deal with increased human mobility in the early 16th century, which has to do with increase of diasporic communities, with increased number of travelers, scholars, but also diplomats and refugees. Since we have in the 15th century a decline of the Byzantine Empire, and just as an important case, also a huge number of Christian refugees from this Eastern Christian context coming actually to Europe, bringing there also their knowledge, their piety, their ideas, and also contributing to what we later called humanism. And those are really important players in this intellectual landscape. And at the same time, we have also new diplomatic connections with other Christian powers, which were not yet there until early modern period of time. At the same time, we have to deal with increased importance of Eastern Christianities due to political reasons. We have to think about Ottoman wars at that period of time, and the fear of being defeated, and therefore we have at that time also a number of powers trying to create new alliances where Eastern Christianities are being understood and as potential allies in these military conflicts. There are also a rise of new transregional powers which are associated with Eastern Christianities. We have a rise of Muscovite duchy. We have a rise of Great Duchy of Lithuania, which are Orthodox, and we have also, of course, Ethiopian Kingdom, which becomes a player on diplomatic scale. And in this context, we also have to do with third dimension, with the production and circulation of theological knowledge, which has to do with also previously mentioned dimension. We have new translation of works written beyond Europe. We have book printing also in non-Latin languages, and we have huge new possibilities for intellectual exchange. So in the following, I will just look to give you just a few examples of what you can imagine under these three dimensions. So larger context, changing maps of global Christianity in the mid-15th and early 16th century. We have the Council of Florence, which is, in my view, was quite a remarkable turning point in context of Western Christianity, where a new awareness of varieties and plurality of Christian world took place in the West. In this context of this Council of Florence, we have a new understanding of various Eastern Christianity. As you can see on the slide, we had attempts of reaching union with Byzantine churches, with Coptic Church, Ethiopian Church, and then also with Armenian, Syriac Orthodox, East Syriac, Maronite Christians, and all these contexts and attempts of producing a convergent union was an important theological development, even though the achieved unions were not of lasting success. This negotiation actually shaped the way as also Western Christians started to understand their place in the global context and the way they understood theology. And that context we also had to do with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, with a number of Byzantine refugees coming to Western Europe and contributing also to what we call now also Renaissance and humanism, and bringing up also the manuscripts and highlighting also importance of Greek language and also biblical philology is being quite developing in this context. And as I said, there is also new Christian political powers on the global map: Grand Duchy of Muscovy, Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and the Ethiopian Kingdom, which became more and more powerful in this period of time. So that's how Europe looked like in around 1500. And here you can see already on the map the Grand Duchy of Muscovy, Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and the third big player, Ethiopia, is not on the map, but also playing a huge role starting from the late 15th century. So Grand Duchy of Moscow, as mentioned, became independent 15th century from ecumenical patriarchate, and after its victory over the Great Horde in 1480, became an important political and economical player, and it also appropriated the narrative of Byzantine heritage, claiming to be the third Rome. A bit to the west from Moscow, we have Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which is political center in Vilnius, which also claims to be the center of Kiev metropolis, having a bishop who claims to actually represent the Kiev metropolis of ecumenical patriarchate. And in the early 16th century, indeed, it is the most important, if you wish, free metropole, free in terms of not being conquered by the Ottomans, free metropole of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And this metropole also develops itself in a very dynamic way, and it also intensifies the context with Latin Christianity. Just to give you an example, we had in Vilnius a council in 1509, which actually discussed the question whether the liturgy can be celebrated abroad in Polish, German, and other lands on a mobile antimins, which is a piece of cloth being used to celebrate liturgy instead of having a stable altar. And the very fact, indeed, that in the early 16th century the question is being debated shows that there is a huge mobility. There are community of Orthodox Christians going to Polish, German, and other lands as mentioned, and it's a clear indication of what I called increasing mobility in this period of time. And we have also to do with book printing, where also Eastern Christian thought being reproduced in this context. We have on the left side, you can see Octoechos, which was printed in Krakow in 1491, which is a book used for celebrating the services in the Orthodox Church, and it's a book in the Church Slavonic language. And on the right, you can see a different example, 1517, Francis Karin prints in Prague a biblical translation into vernacular, what he called Biblia Ruska, or Russian Bible fish, which is being translated into vernacular of the Great Duchy of Lithuania, which can be called an Old Belarusian language. And it is also an important development at that time. And another player, as I mentioned also, the Ethiopian kingdom, which was perceived at that time in Europe as the land of Priester John, this mythological idea of a mighty Christian kingdom, which is beyond the Muslim world, and which might play a huge role in potential war against the Muslims. So the land of Priester John has been searched for in different areas in Asia, has been associated with different contexts, and in the early 16th century, this projection was associated with Ethiopian kingdom, which started to develop its diplomatic context with Latin Christian world at that time. And we have at the same time also a development of Ethiopian diasporic communities also in the Mediterranean world. One important community was in Rome, in Vatican itself. So on this picture you can see the Peter's dome, and behind you see in the Vatican gardens this small red church, a church called Santo Stefano dei Mori. This church can still be seen in the Vatican gardens in Vatican, and since 1400s we have documented presence of Ethiopians in this community. And by late 15th century, it was indeed accepted as a permanent Ethiopian monastery, which also had its permission by Pope to function there as an Ethiopian Orthodox monastery. And we have also the rules of this monastery. And up to a certain period of time in 16th century, they were indeed tolerated as Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, being seen as representatives of this mighty kingdom of Priester John. The situation changes later on, but up to this period of time, we have a case of huge tolerance and interest towards also Ethiopian Christians, and also intellectual exchange. In the early 16th century, we have an example of also intercultural intellectual exchange. Translation, not in translation, but edition of Ethiopian Psalter was prepared, for example, in Rome, in this community, by an Ethiopian scholar, Thomas Walde Samuel, together with German scholar, Johannes Potken, and it was printed also there quite early. So that's just few examples of what I actually mean when I speak about these global epistemic entanglements. And in my view, indeed, These global epistemic entanglements are crucial for understanding all the dynamics and developments in European Christianity in the 16th century. And in my view, we cannot properly understand also the Reformation without taking into account these developments. So again, in my view, we should not only ask how did the Reformation impacted the Christian world, but also rather how did the Christian world impacted the Reformation. And now I would like to focus on a case study and try to place the Wittenberg Reformation in a global context. So as I said, it's just a case study, and there are plenty of different possibilities of dealing with this question. And what I'm trying to offer to you is just one possible way to deal with this story. So what I'm referring to is encounter between two leading figures of the Wittenberg Reformation, Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon, and an Ethiopian monk and deacon, Abba Mika'el. And I'm dealing actually in the article, which was now published in the journal, with this particular encounter. Therefore, I'm not going to focus very much on the encounter itself and the, giving you context and analysis of the encounter, since you can read in the article. I'm trying to only highlight one particular aspect of this encounter. So in order to do so, I would like to focus on one particular source we have, and this particular source is a letter of recommendation which was written by Martin Luther and given to Abba Mika'el. So the Ethiopian monk came to Wittenberg 1534, stayed there in Wittenberg for several weeks, and during these weeks he actually had quite intensive exchange with the reformers, with Melanchthon and Luther. And after the end of his stay, he asked for a letter of recommendation, since he was about to visit other communities which were aligned with the Reformation. And this letter of recommendation, it's one particular approach or particular perspectives I would like to show based on this one source, without going into detail on the other sources we have and analysis of the encounter itself. As I mentioned, you can read it in the article. So now I would like to look only on this particular source in order to show the dynamics which developed later on in historiography Reformation. So we have this particular source, and we have, interestingly, a huge number of manuscripts, copies produced in the early 16th century, which were circulated among the adherents of the Reformation. And I would like also to claim that this particular encounter between Luther and Ethiopian monk had indeed an impact on emerging Protestant concepts of belonging and identities. So in this letter of recommendation, Luther highlights actually the idea I showed already in the beginning, what Luther started stating in 1518, 1519, highlighting that his ideas are aligned with the ideas of Christian East and Christian Orient. It's exactly what also can be found here in the letter of recommendation. So just a short quotation. For although the Eastern Church observes some deviant customs, Abba Mika'el judges that this difference neither annuls the unity of the Church nor contends with the faith, because the kingdom of Christ is spiritual righteousness of heart, godliness and trust through Christ. We, meaning Luther and Melanchthon, also approach this view. So just a short quotation from this letter of recommendation, highlighting this idea that actually Christians of Ethiopia and Christians who are aligned with Luther and Melanchthon are indeed, from the perspective of these three persons mentioned here, have the same faith. So in this statement was of quite enough importance for the early Protestant community in the early 16th century, as I would like to share. So now I'd like to focus only on the social life of the text and show you two parts. The first part, how the remembering of this event, of this encounter in the early 16th century took place, and later on, how it was marginalized and why. So the first part is remembering. So this encounter of Luther with Abba Mika'el was an important point of reference in the early 16th century, and also for Luther himself. So we have also several mentionings of this encounter by Luther in his table talks, but also in his sermons, and all these mentionings also go in the same direction, highlighting the unity of the church by putting the idea of Luther in the context of Eastern Christianity. Just to give an example, here a sermon given by Luther 4 years later, 1537. So he says, "And if someone were to come from India, or from the land of the Moors, or from wherever he might come, and were to say, 'I believe in Christ,' then I would say, 'So do I believe, and thus I too shall be saved.' And in faith and confession Christians agree with one another, even though otherwise they are indeed scattered here and there across the whole world. For it is not called a Roman or Nuremberg or Wittenberg church, but a Christian church to which all belong who believe in Christ." So the very same idea. And the reference to India or the land of Moors is also interesting, since Ethiopia at that time was referred to sometimes as India interior, or interior India, or the land of Moors is the term Luther used in his translation of the Bible to refer to Greek Ethiopia. So he translated it in the German as Morgenland. What is in Greek text is Ethiopia, or in Hebrew, Kush. So he most probably also refers not to an abstract potential encounter with someone from India or land of Moors, but to his particular encounter with Abba Mika'el. So as I said, there is a large number of manuscripts containing the letter of recommendation, and interestingly, we have also quite early the first printed version of this letter of recommendation in 1565 in a collection of letters of Philip Melanchthon. That's interesting because Melanchthon was the one who prepared the draft of the letter, which later was signed by Luther. So we have already 1565 the first printed version. But what is interesting also is other manuscripts. So here on the right, you can see a particular copy from which is kept now at the University Library of Basel. Here you have a bigger copy of it, and it is quite a special one, I would say. It's from 1545 to 1555, so some years after the encounter itself. And it's interesting that there is a quite small deviation from other copies. Since if you would look here closely, you would see that it is written here a letter of recommendation given by Martin Luther to an episcopal, to a bishop. So, and in this letter, it is depicted that Abba Mika'el was indeed not just a deacon, but a bishop. And it's quite fascinating, since in Ethiopian church up to 20th century, we had only one single bishop. Since Ethiopian church used to be part of the Coptic Orthodox Church, Alexandrian Patriarchate, and having one metropolitan only as a single bishop, which would imply, indeed, if the author would know it, that Martin Luther actually met the head of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as there was only, indeed, one bishop. So that's only one example of how this encounter was not only important for the early Protestant community, but which also were interested in even highlighting this encounter and even giving a higher status to this person who met Luther. And later on, in the second generation of Protestant theologians, those who studied by Luther and Melanchthon. We also have a similar narrative, similar attempt to highlight the unity of faith with Ethiopian Christians. So we have here, for example, Professor David Hitreus, who also wrote in his comments on Apocalypse about Ethiopia, where he also referred to actual developments, writing, "In Ethiopia, the gospel of Christ is publicly preached, and Christians and the true believers live much more peacefully and securely than in France, Spain, and other places in Europe." So that's fascinating because he refers to the persecution of Protestants in Catholic-dominated areas. And then he said that true believers live much more peacefully in Ethiopia, equaling actually those Protestants and Ethiopian Christians and seeing them as true believers and depicting at the same time, the enemies who are here, the Roman Catholic theologians and people in power. And then he also highlights that the proper use of the whole sacrament is believed, taught, and observed in the same part of Africa, no differently than among us. So the very strong ideas of togetherness and unity between Protestants and Ethiopian Orthodox Christians. The same we had also, we can see in other writings in this generation, but what is also important is that this theological re-evaluation of Ethiopian Christianity was closely linked to also geographical remapping of Ethiopia. So in the Protestant imagination, Ethiopia played bigger and bigger role, and it's quite interesting, like Matthäus Dresser, another Protestant theologian at the time, wrote that Ethiopia is almost comparable in size to the whole of Europe or to the entirety of the Christendom. So this idea that Ethiopia actually is a huge kingdom was quite popular, and also the Protestant cartographers start to depict Ethiopia in that way. So here is an example, a map by Abraham Ortelius from 1570, and here you can see the region marked yellow. In his imagination was indeed whole region belonging to the Ethiopian kingdom, which is of course an exaggeration from the modern point of view. Or this is a very similar dynamic by Matthias Quad, a different map from the year 1600, where you also have the idea of Abyssinia or Ethiopia being a huge country, having the region almost equaling to the half of African continent. And also you have here a depiction of Christian king, which also referred to iconography of Prester John, which had dominated medieval period of time. And also this Prester John narrative is being also renovated and adopted also in the Protestant context. So that's how the discursive appropriation of Ethiopian Christianity shaped also the idea of Protestant identity in the early 16th century, which at that time was a minority in many contexts of Europe, and also a persecuted minority in many contexts, and which sought for its own legitimization and sought for allies. And Ethiopia was a wonderful area where their own ideas can be projected upon. And now I'm coming to the second part, which I called Forgetting and Marginalizing. And it is a period of time in the social life of this text, of this letter of recommendation, which takes place a bit later, where Protestants themselves became more powerful in Europe and perhaps didn't need so much an imaginary ally. And let's see how actually this letter of recommendations being actually reproduced in Europe. In fact, we see that for quite a long period of time, it didn't play a larger role. Only by the late 18th century, we have first next printed version appearing. And here it's also a very interesting dynamic can be observed. So here I have quoted the introduction explanation of the editor to the letter. So what actually this letter is about. And the editor, Gottfried Schütze, writes here, so be careful, letter of recommendation for a stranger who, with regard to his confession of faith, professed adherence to the Greek Church, yet at the same time thought in a thoroughly sound and evangelical manner. Therefore, Luther is of the opinion that one should not withdraw active compassion and support from him. So it's really fascinating because in the letter of recommendation, which was written in Latin, there is only reference to the Eastern Church or Oriental Church, Ecclesia Orientalis. And here already equals the Oriental or Eastern Church with the Greek Church. So we have this first shift from Oriental Church to the Greek Church, and also equaling it with the evangelical manner. And then let's come to the next publication of the text, 1827, by Wilhelm Martin de Wette, and he titles the text Open Letter of Recommendation. Luther recommends a Greek clergyman as Orthodox. So we have now the third shift. First shift was from Oriental confession of church or confession of faith to the Greek confession of faith or Greek church, and now we have here a Greek clergyman, and the Ethiopian monk now completely disappears from the perception. What is interesting also that the most important collection of works of Martin Luther, called Weimar edition. So it's the collection of all works written by Martin Luther, which has been edited since many decades and published in Weimar. It actually has no mentioning of this letter. It was not included in the table of contents, and this letter also didn't get a consecutive number as all other texts published there did. So you cannot find this text in index, and it's also quite a strange thing. And if you look actually when this edition was made, you might probably understand why it took place, because this edition was produced during the Nazi time in Germany in the 1930s. And at that moment of time, it was also quite a problem for editors to show that Martin Luther had a dialogue with an African theologian, and having indeed a quite productive and very friendly and indeed very strange dynamic in this dialogue, actually trying to legitimize his own position by showing that also an African Ethiopian church adheres to the same ideas in practice as he, Luther, does. So having this hierarchy in a different manner as it used to be accepted at the time. So we have actually here a clear dynamic of one singular source first being celebrated, then later on being neglected, and then when it became published again, it first get a different title, where we have Ethiopian church and Ethiopian monk being actually erased from the memory, and then later on again the whole text also is being forgotten. So as I would like to highlight, the reception of this letter of recommendation as a case study can also review certain mechanism of remembering and marginalization, which always also to do with the context in which this remembering or marginalization take place, depending on the needs of the community which remembers or marginalizes, depending on their needs at a certain moment of time. And this mechanism also shaped how this, if you wish, ecumenical understanding between Luther and Abba Mika'el was remembered and forgotten over the centuries. And over time, this process has led to the Ethiopian monks' visit to Wittenberg being pushed out of the archive of collective memories, and only careful historical work can help us to understand how actually this happened, and it can help us to rewrite also this history, because we have to do with confessional communities of memory, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. So the way the history of Christianity is being narrated has almost always to do with certain confessional communities of memory, with certain churches, which tries to narrate the history of Christianity from a theological point of view, or from the point of view of their own community, and which tend actually to raise certain events or encounters, entanglements in their own history, which do not fit to certain developments or their understanding at certain period of time. And therefore, in my view, also highlighting this entanglement, highlighting the role of world Christianity, highlighting the role of Eastern or Oriental Christianity, also can help us to decenter these narratives of confessional communities of memory and come to, as I said, yes, more inclusive understanding of global history of Christianity. And this one particular encounter of Martin Luther with Abba Mika'el is just a particular case study. And as I mentioned, if you're interested in this particular encounter, in more details, you can read the article, since what I did now in my talk was highlighting, some larger question and not going into details, looking into this encounter itself. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I'm really very much looking forward to your questions or your comments. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Paulau. Thank you for your presentation. João Luiz, se quiserem voltar, mandam bailezinho aí. Thank you very much. I have a lot of questions for you, and of course, some reactions about your article, your paper. When I read it for the first time, I already was impacted by our discipline that we are, the seminars that we were taking that time, but the most important theoretical part that impacts our historiography also is that perception of decentralized Europe from our narratives. I already told you a lot about that, how Brazilian historiography also is impacted by this Eurocentralization that we call from the point of view of history, that also impacts the lack of researches on Eastern Christianity here. And the key words that I can define your paper, and a lot of that is interactions, more than just impact. What this interaction show us about these connections between Europe and other places that are Christians. And one recurrent narrative that is frequent here is that the Europeans bring the Christianity to Americas, and of course they spread the Christianity to the rest of the world. But this shows us that the Christian tradition is more diverse than Europe and is present in other places. Emblematic is to understand that when Portuguese reached Ethiopia, they found Christians. And this is a very important point, very emblematic to show how these interactions between Christians and Europeans. And I wonder what was the impact that we know about these letters, about the impact that Abba Mika'el made to Martin Luther, but I wonder what impact that did Martin Luther did to Abba Mika'el, what he perceived about these debates. He agrees with everything, or he are just agreeing because he stayed here with them, and after that he disagrees with everyone, everything that he says. I mean, what we can just wonder what he really think about it. But it's very, very interesting to understand how this interaction show through these letters. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. If I may just very shortly. So
yes,
you rightly highlighted important aspect, the very way we are thinking about the history and, European discovering various parts of the world, Portuguese coming to Ethiopia, finding out Christians there. So in fact, Ethiopian Christians came to Europe earlier than the Portuguese Christians came to Ethiopia. So in fact, it were Ethiopian Christians who discovered Europe earlier than the Europeans discovered Ethiopian Christianity. And the same way, framing this encounter can help us also to center our perspective of Europeans being humanists, being researchers, being scholars, being interested in discovering various practices, religious and context, and then trying to make sense out of it. So we have in this context an Ethiopian Christian who most probably lived in Rome for a while, because we know that when he came to Wittenberg, he was able to speak some Italian. So it was the English of the means of communication was the Italian language, and one of the students of the university translated to Luther and Mika'el from Italian into German. So we have an Ethiopian guy who stayed in Rome, learned the Italian, and most probably understood that there are vivid debates on religious issues, and tried to make sense himself out of these debates, who came to Wittenberg to meet the theologians who were responsible for some of these controversies, being very much interested. And the very fact that he asked for a letter of recommendation shows that he was interested in going to meet other reformers. And we know indeed that he planned to go to Strasbourg, to Martin Bucer, to another important theologian of the Reformation. And it decenters in a way the perspective we try to have, or often have, highlighting those European scholars, theologians, researchers, going to different places, collecting data, making sense of this data. And we have here also an example of an Ethiopian intellectual and theologian doing something similar, I would say.
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, thank you. Giacomazi is asking, there's a scholarly production on relations between Catholic Church and Ethiopian Christianity, a relation which gradually shifted the dialogue from dialogue to hostility. How can we measure the theological relationship between Protestant actors and Ethiopian in the modern era? It is possible to establish comparative parameters with the former case.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a really wonderful question. And of course, you're right. We have a strong scholarship on early encounter between, first of all, the Catholic and Jesuit actors and Ethiopian Christianity. And this scholarship has focused very much on, as I mentioned, Jesuits, the archives kept in Lisbon and Rome. So it's very much historiography focusing on these actors. So in my view, it's important to have also a bit more larger pictures, since also the most important actors in that context, for example, Damien de Gauche, who was responsible for publishing important sources on Ethiopian Christianity, was someone who also went to Wittenberg and met there also Luther and Melanchthon, explaining him about his encounters with Ethiopian envoys on the court in Lisbon, and creating a network, speaking also with people we call as humanists, like Erasmus of Rotterdam. So in my view, we have to deal with a very decentered intellectual network of people who actually go beyond confessional boundaries. And in order to understand those debates, we need to have knowledge about both Catholic, Protestant, and other intellectuals debating these developments, because discovery, if you put this in this way, of Ethiopia was a huge impact, had a huge impact on intellectual scene all around Europe. And to understand these developments, we need to have a larger picture. And to ask ourselves how actually we can measure it, it's really a very interesting question. And I think it would be very tricky to find parameters, scales. How do we measure things? And I will not probably say we can deal with this with help of network analysis, and rather see, how information comes from A to B and how debates are being developed in this context. But it's difficult to measure, it in a mathematical sense, I would say. But it's really very interesting perspective. Very good question. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, Jaco. Thank you. Nós da História is written. I think he's writing the question, but until he finished, I can ask you a lot of another thing about the word episcopal that he mentions in the letter. You say that we could assume that this Abba Mika'el could be the head of the Ethiopian church. Am I right? If I understand correct.
So maybe I didn't make my point quite clearly. So what we know is that this Abba Mika'el was a deacon and a monk. So, and we have it written in the letter of recommendation and in all the manuscripts, having this copy of letter of recommendation in all manuscripts, but in one not. So in one manuscript kept in Basel, we have a different title saying he was a bishop. So, and it's, from my perspective, an interesting fact. The first fact is interesting, that we have a huge number of handwritten copies of this letter of recommendation. So we have more copies of this letter than of the most other letters of Luther, which would mean for the early community of Protestant, of Lutherans, if you wish, this letter was an important piece of history, important for their identity. And the second important information we can argue, that someone thought that it is not only important that Luther met an Ethiopian theologian and thought that they have unity in faith, but in fact he wanted to give higher status to this conversation and a higher status to this claim of Christian unity, and therefore he changed the status of this theologian from deacon, which is not high ecclesiastical status, to bishop. So it's a testimony, in my view, of remembrance practice of the early Protestant community, which actually highlights the very fact that Luther had this conversation with the Ethiopian church and tries to give it even higher status, say actually it was a bishop.
I see. So that we could assume that this word could say about this process of transmission of this text.
Yeah.
Yes. Antes de eu passar para a próxima pergunta, before I say the next question, I would like to share, gostaria de apresentar the new volume of the Oriente Cristão, novo volume da Revista Oriente Cristão. Já está aqui no site. Pessoal, confiram Oriente Cristão, procura no Google, segue ou assina ou passa aqui no QR Code, you can access você pode acessar todos os textos da Revista Oriente Cristão, os textos gnósticos cristãos, porque o livro de Enoque foi preservado na tradição etíope, why did the Enoch book was preserved in Ethiopic Christian tradition, ecos da tradição enóquica no cristianismo etíope, um monge ortodoxo etíope no berço da Reforma, Abba Mika'el, Martinho Lutero e a unidade da igreja, Stanislau Paulau, the text of Professor Paulau here, and a oração dos sete dormentes, o apostolado escandaloso, as relações de Vital de Gaza, a contra-reforma na Índia, os portugueses e os cristãos de São Tomé, Dom Germano de Farhad e a influência da língua árabe na Igreja Maronita, e a visita de Dom Eftimios e o caminho bispo Melquitas de Zalé ao Brasil em 1934 e 1935. Temos as traduções também, comentários acerca das cartas de Agostinho de Hipona, Milânia Jovem, uma homilia em memória de São Frumêncio de Jackson e outros documentos relacionados, e uma tradução ao prólogo da Elexíada, por Ana Comena. Por favor, acessem, se vocês tiverem curiosidade, questões. A gente está preparando um evento com os autores para falarem um pouco dos trabalhos. Acessem sempre a revista, tá bom? Please access the journal website. You can see all the articles published in this issue. And okay, for the next question, Nós da História. In the movie Luther, his first intervention against the professor was in the Greek Christians about the proposition no salvation outside the church. We can say that the film was quite realistic about Luther and his concern on Greek Christianity.
I would say yes and no. Yes, in terms of highlighting the importance of Christians beyond Roman Church, and no, in terms of, as we saw, the Greeks were not the only one who played a larger role, since Luther himself, from the early writings, highlights also other churches being quite, persuasive, showing that the Greek or Byzantine Church was not the only one he was referring to, but also speaking about, as he put it, all Christians of Orient and Africa, and then also highlighting different Christian contexts. But yes, basically the film is right, highlighting this importance of those Christian churches which were not part of, not under the papal authority for those debates, yes.
Nós da História, se quiser reagir, pode mandar aí no chat, tá bom? Luiz Lobianco manda. Damião de Góes wrote in Fides Religio Moresca Ethiopium, which he describes the faith, the customs, and the organization of the Ethiopian church. He also keep the contact with the first reformers. To anyone who can be interested in this material, there's a lot of material in Portuguese about this Damião de Góes. Leandro Cesar.
So if I may just share shortly, so thank you very much for highlighting Damião de Góes. So it's really fascinating, a different encounter, if you wish. So Damião de Góes also met an Ethiopian theologian, Sigeza Ab, who actually wrote down this work on the customs and faith of Ethiopians, which was published by Damião de Góes, so within his larger work. So we have actually also a case of collaboration of a European and Ethiopian scholar producing knowledge on Ethiopian Christianity. And I also dealt within my dissertation also with Damião de Góes in this encounter, which is also a really fascinating one. And then again, as you rightly highlighted, Damião de Góes also had contacts with Luther and Melanchthon, while also producing this text on Ethiopian Christianity, showing again that it was like transcontinental intellectual exchange, which shaped many of intellectuals at that time.
Professor João, do you have a question to Professor Paulau, please? You are.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, I have a broader questions. Actually, to see if I actually understood your point here in the presentation, which was very interesting, very good. My question is, my impression is that at least in the beginning, the reform was kind of open towards ecumenism. Yeah, the idea that if you share the faith in Christ, they all belong to the same church, more or less. But I'm not very familiar with the history of Protestantism. But it seems that nowadays, or even not some time later than that, this was not at least a big issue. I mean, against or in favor or against it. I ask you, so when does this openness to ecumenism stop it to become a thing, or if it even stopped to becoming something important in the Reform? That's my question.
Yes, it's a really great question. So I would be a bit provocative and say that actually this openness towards ecumenism by Luther was a fake openness, because in my view, he used Ethiopian church in order to combat other Christians within European context. If we read the text, also this text of recommendation, how does he justify that Abba Mika'el is, in his view, Orthodox or true believer? He says he adheres to the same idea of the Trinity and to the same way of celebrating liturgy as we, meaning Luther and Melanchthon, does. And those, actually, if you look at the context, those are two huge debates at the time, also within the Reformation movement, because we have a very strong movement saying that the teaching about Trinity is not biblical. Therefore, we do not, as Protestants, we do not need teaching about Trinity. And Luther actually tries to combat this movement. And then he uses, in this particular case, Ethiopian as saying, actually, it is early Christian practice and belief to have also the doctrine of Trinity. And therefore, he uses in this point as marker of true believing, of orthodoxy. And the second point, also the way of celebrating liturgy, his debates was against so-called Calvinists or Swiss Reformation, also huge debates, how to understand also the Eucharist and the liturgy. And against, he says, the Ethiopians understand the way of celebrating liturgy exactly as we do. So St. Luther and Melanchthon. So in my view, since Ethiopia was in view of European intellectual and Christians, indeed a country which has a huge, long history of Christianity, it could easily be used as an argument of a long-standing Christian tradition which was not corrupted by papal authority. And therefore, it was strategical use of Ethiopians in order to make their own arguments and stand better within those theological debates. Therefore, I would be a bit careful, saying it was a true openness. In my view, it was rather strategic use of information in those debates which were urgent at that time in Europe itself.
Okay, it is as if they instrumentalize the Ethiopian Christians to say, okay, since we share the same faith and same practice, we are not innovating. Who is innovating is the Catholic Church.
Yes, Catholic and anti-Trinitarians and the Swiss Reformation, those are wrong guys, and we are right. And to prove that we are right, we say that even Ethiopians have the same ideas. Therefore, you should believe that we are right. Because look, they practice Christianity since 2,000 years. They had no pope. Therefore, they had no corruption. And since they have the same idea as we, that means we are right and you are wrong. So you, meaning, anti-Trinitarian, Swiss Reformation, and of course, the Roman Catholic Church.
Interesting. Thank you very much.
Before I pass to the Leandro's question, you say that even the Ethiopian believe that. Would you say that Martin Luther has a point of view about the Ethiopians itself that is the minor, or would be like we are equal in the church?
So I think politically, evidently, Ethiopia was much higher. As I mentioned, it was an idea that it's a huge, powerful, mighty Christian kingdom, which is more powerful than Europe. And therefore, it of course was something much more powerful and also important than the stance of the Protestant areas. Even within Europe at the time, early 16th century, the areas which became Protestant were quite tiny, and the Protestants even were a minority. So therefore, I don't think there is a sense of arrogance when he speaks about Ethiopia. Rather, as I said, he can use Ethiopia in order to support his arguments, because he thinks that Ethiopia also in eyes of his opponents is being seen as a point of reference, a legitimate point of reference of an ancient Christian country, which also being imagined as a powerful Christian entity, political entity. So therefore, I think in this context, we do not have what we have starting from the 18th century, or maybe even earlier, where we have a strong sense of arrogance and the idea that actually also Ethiopian Christianity is kind of a corrupted Christianity. So we have very strong anti-Ethiopian or anti-Orthodox or anti-African sentiment among Protestant theologians, starting at least in 18th century. But I would claim that 16th century, it's a totally different context yet, and where we have different hierarchy, where actually Ethiopian Christianity would be placed on discursive map on a higher position than its European or some parts of European Christianity.
Oh, thank you very much. I believe that Pastor John also helped with this point of view. For Leandro Cesar asks, splendid presentation. Samantha Kelly stated that it was Satan faction of the Ethiopian church saw the Council of Florence as an opportunity to be freed from the Egyptian leadership. In this way, it's possible to say that Ethiopian clergy were aware of a global disintegration and that they took advantage of it, probably knowing about the strife between the Pope and Basil. If yes, did they also take advantage of the Eurasian political climate during the 16th century?
Wonderful question and wonderful reference to the work of Samantha Kelly, so I can only recommend it also. So it's really also true in my view that Ethiopian Christians actually could navigate in a very intelligent and clever manner. And I would also say that one of the reasons why they were able to do so were the network of diasporic communities. Ethiopia had a very important also center in Jerusalem with their own monastery and a huge monastic community, and a practice of pilgrimage of Ethiopians to Jerusalem, and also having communities also in other areas, not only in Egypt, but also around the Mediterranean, which would also imply possibilities of sharing of information about what's happening also in Western Christendom. And of course, some of the parties, also fractions within the church, tried their best to deal with the situation, which sometimes also led to awkward situation. So we also have several cases of Ethiopians who would come also to important European courts claiming they were ambassadors of the Pastor John, trying to make advantage also of some narratives or some practices and trying to make advantage for themselves personally. Or there are also kind of cases where he have indeed a very strategic political and diplomatic actions by some fractions of the church or by the political elite of Ethiopia. But I would say that that's a really important observation, that Ethiopians were indeed important players also on European scene, which also operated in a very clever manner, having information about what is going on.
Leandro, se quiser reagir ao comentário do professor, fique à vontade. Elias also said that it was an excellent presentation. Congratulations for your research. And also Elias on another account, congratulations, Professor Paulau, by the research and presentation. Thank you. Obrigado, Elias, pela iniciativa, pelo comentário. Leandro também, thank you very much for your answer. Agora mais uma só um minuto. Mais uma divulgação. Another announcement. We are calling for articles for the volume 3 issue number 1. If you have se você tiver algum artigo, algum trabalho, alguma nota de pesquisa, a revista está aberta para novos artigos sobre igrejas, sobre história do cristianismo no Oriente Médio, Cáucaso e África, textos e línguas, a gente aceita traduções, não há um limite temporal também, então trabalhamos com textos em história contemporânea, tivemos um excelente sobre uma visita aqui no Brasil, que foi trazida pelo Luiz, então aceitamos o Oriente Cristão no Brasil, é importante falar sobre as comunidades aqui no Brasil. Então, artigos científicos, traduções, comentários de fontes, entrevistas, notas de pesquisa e resenhas de livros são aceitas, e não tem uma titulação mínima para submissão. Se você for estudante de graduação, já pode enviar um texto para a gente, ou se você não é estudante, também pode enviar. Pesquisadores independentes são bem-vindos. If you have any questions about the submission process, you can ask me or ask anyone in the GEOC team. We are accepting articles, translations, interviews, research notes, and reviews on books. We don't have a minimum title. Esqueci a palavra em inglês. For submission. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. And of course, we also have a banner for it. If you, we are accepting until 31, the last day of August, último dia de agosto. Se você tiver algum dia 31 de agosto, é o prazo de submissão para sair no próximo volume. Então, fiquem convidados para isso. Professor Paulau, if you can share the words through your students or
Yes.
Colleagues, we are calling for articles and papers for the next volume of the review. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry. And to finalize, do you have last words you want to say, Professor Paulau, or João Vicente? Você tem alguma pergunta para fazer?
I would like to thank once again for the possibility of sharing my work, both in print and also in this presentation. I'm really fascinated by the dynamic of this network and the research being done also in Brazil on Oriental Christianity. So I think it's really wonderful that these emerging fields are there, and that we are also trying to build bridges among various communities working on this question beyond our national boundaries, national universities, academic context, but also to bridge those linguistic barriers. So thank you very much for making this exchange possible.
That's what I would like to call that we are doing connected history in practice. So thank you very much for, of course, for being here with us. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to authorize that we could translate your article. And anyway, João.
No, I just want to thank you for the very interesting presentation and for being available for us. I know it's an initiative that is very different from what you used to. I know that because I come from the same world. We all come from the same world, academic world. So what we are trying to do here is very different from what usually is done. So thank you very much for that. And in name of GEOC, we thank you. And nós agradecemos também todos que estão aqui assistindo, fazendo as perguntas. Vi que o fato de ter sido em inglês, e a gente teve um problema técnico que não conseguia ativar as legendas, não foi um problema. Houve muitas perguntas, muito interesse, então eu agradeço. Então convido também, reforço o convite do Murilo para que as pessoas leiam a Oriente Cristão, divulguem para possíveis interessados, e caso tenha alguma coisa para publicar, mande o nosso artigo para a gente, que a gente vai avaliar com carinho, tá bom? And that's it. Thank you very much, Professor Paulau. And we hope that we can do something together again anytime soon.
Thank you very much.
Obrigado, pessoal, pela presença de todo mundo. Realmente a gente teve um problema técnico nas legendas, mas assim que esse vídeo terminar, for disponibilizado no YouTube, ele vai estar com as legendas ativadas. I'm sorry for the subtitles wasn't there for who wasn't familiarized with the Portuguese also. And thank you for your presence here. The subtitles will be available after we finish this transmission. And for the last time, I would like to say thank you very much, Professor Paulau. We are finishing our transmission right now. And thank you for everyone for being here with us.